This is a Film Stories original podcast.
Love this podcast? Support this show through the Acast supporter feature. It's up to you how much you give and there's no regular commitment. Just hit the link in the show description to support now.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever think about switching insurance companies to see if you could save some cash? Progressive makes it easy to see if you could save when you bundle your home and auto policies. Try it at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary, not available in all states.
Explaining football to the friend who's just there for the nachos? Hard. Tailgating from home like a pro with snacks and drinks everyone will love? An easy win. And with Instacart helping deliver the snack time MVPs to your door, you're ready for the game in as fast as 30 minutes. So you never miss a play or lose your seat on the couch or have to go head-to-head for the last chicken wing. Shop Game Day Faves on Instacart and enjoy $0 delivery fees on your first 3 grocery orders. Offer valid for a limited time. Other fees and terms apply.
Are you a professional pillow fighter? Or a 9-to-5 low-cost time travel agent? Or maybe real estate sales on Mars is your profession? It doesn't matter. Whatever it is you do, however complex or intricate, Monday.com can help you organize, orchestrate, and make it more efficient. Monday.com is the one centralized platform for everything work-related. And with Monday.com, work is just easier. Monday.com, for whatever you run. Go to Monday.com to learn more.
This is Writers on Film, the only podcast dedicated to books on cinema. Hello and welcome to Writers on Film. My name is John Bleasdale. I am a writer and film critic, and today I'm going to be talking to a legend in the film business, Al Clarke. He started his career in London as a publicist before becoming one of the main players in the Virgin film adventure, which had such an impact on British cinema in the 1980s, before leaving for Australia and having just as big an impact, if not a bigger impact, on the Australian film industry. But what I've done is, because Al's got such an extraordinary life, he's also written several books, including a memoir called Time Flies and a book about Raymond Chandler's years as a Hollywood screenwriter called Chandler in Hollywood. He's also written a sequel to his memoir, Time Flies 2. So I've divided his conversation into two because it's because I just didn't want to rush it. It's such an interesting guy to talk to, so many great insights. I wanted to get as much out of it as possible, and rather than squeeze it into one episode, there's going to be a second part to this episode coming up in the next few weeks. But before we get to that, first of all, you have to listen to this episode, which is a wonderful listen, as I'm sure you'll agree. If you enjoy the episode, remember to like and subscribe, do all that stuff. You can follow me on Twitter at Dr. Jonty, DRJONTY. And in the coming weeks, look out for Cinema Italia, the new podcast that I'm presenting and producing on, which will be a journey through Italian cinema with special guests from all over, including Italy, and I'm really looking forward to. I've already recorded a couple of episodes. I'm really looking forward to putting them out in the following weeks. So look out for that. But before you do any of that, sorry about the long introduction, but before you do any of that, please enjoy the conversation. Congratulations on the book. I've only read volume 1, but I'm heading straight from volume 1 into volume 2 as we speak, because there's so much. Wow, what a life.
Well, so far so good. It felt like a kind of, as I wrote it and as I reread it afterwards, it felt oddly like a life of innocence in which I had just wandered into things that interested me, following that bizarre childhood and my relationship with the village cinema and so on. I just found in London, when I became an adult, that I was just doing things that interested me without having struggled to achieve them.
Yeah, you kind of following your passion. But I'd love to start with that, a childhood in Spain, and how you talk about sort of experiencing the cinema in this dubbed version of Hollywood. That's so interesting that you begin with that kind of dislocation.
Completely, and they all spoke Castilian, so that even in films set in, say, the American West, where they might speak in Spanish, a counterpart of, say, Andaluz or some regional accent, they all spoke like university professors, even if they were played by John Wayne. And so there was this immediate disruption on watching it once, but that disruption only started when I began to see films, British language films in English. Until then, I really did, as a small child, think that all these people spoke Spanish, including Tarzan.
I live in Italy at the moment, and we have there's a hangover from the fascist period as well. A dubbing industry which is kind of legally mandated, and some actors become very famous for dubbing certain people. So the Robert De Niro dubber is very famous because he also does Sylvester Stallone and Al Pacino. So he sort of covers all those major actors.
Has he ever been photographed with them? Because
I'm sure he has, because they kind of almost because they're kind of actors in their own right. It's not that they're only this guy's called Amendola. And his son was in Nostromo, the BBC sort of big adaptation. But he's in Heat, when Al Pacino and Robert De Niro meet, it's him dubbing both voices.
That's excellent. That is exactly the kind of fact that most appeals to me, and would have been in my book had you told me earlier. They were the dubbers in Spain were also famous, and as is the case with the Italian actors you mentioned, famous in their own right. But there was a ritual that when big American stars came to Spain, they met their dubber, and so there was always a press photograph taken. So, when Charlton Heston came over to make, El Cid and 55 Days at Peking, he met his dubber. And it was hilarious because it was a kind of ritual. It was like a school photograph, except that it was two adults who couldn't speak each other's language.
I mean, I know that some careers were sort of promoted more. So, for instance, Laurel and Hardy, the guy who plays Oliver Hardy, who dubs it, Alberto Sordi, was the more famous actor. And so Oliver Hardy is the bigger sort of comedian in Laurel and Hardy in Italy, whereas I would kind of, my own bias would go more towards Stan Laurel, perhaps, because he's from the same town I was born.
Well, he wasn't dubbed by as distinctive an actor as Sordi. And Sordi, of course, was very big in Spain as well, except there, more confusingly, he spoke Spanish.
So when you start to see these, I mean, to begin with, that village that you describe so beautifully in your book of your upbringing, it's such a, we watching something like Cinema Paradiso. I know, again, it's not Spanish, but it's that idea of the isolated. I think you refer to it in the book, actually, the isolated little village, and the cinema is sort of like a window to the world.
Yes, yeah, that's exactly what it was, because our village was its isolation was compounded by the fact that it was on the banks of a river. And the river was quite wide and treacherous and could only be crossed by the public motorboat that used to go over about 6 times a day or so. So its isolation was complete, and until they built a bridge across the river from the town Huelva, which was where traffic would have come from had we had any then. Then the village changed, and obviously, as cars drove through it, so they changed the nature of the village. But we used to go across as children or as young adolescents. We used to row boats across the river, unaware of how we were risking our lives in order to see some hideous B Western that happened to take our attention, and we just did it routinely because that was the only way that you could see films outside of the village by getting to the town across the river.
Yeah, I mean, I lived in the middle of nowhere in the northwest of England, just south of the Lake District, and I used to walk home at night from the pub just because there was either you went to the pub or you didn't go to the pub, but you had to walk. There was no other choice. It wasn't just, and it's crazy. 2:00 in the morning, walking through the fields and what have you. You go to Scotland to boarding school, and this is your first sort of exposure to British culture. Is that right? Is that or were you visiting?
Yeah. Well, my parents were my first exposure to British culture, in that they were Scots. They fraternized with each other. They were a little unit within the village, and my father was there because that was where his job was. But they wore their isolation quite well, and but they were determined that I should have a Scottish education because they were both Scots from Glasgow. And so it was ordained. I mean, I started hearing about how I was going, quotes, home to Scotland from the age of about 2 onwards. And of course, to me, home was where I was in the Spanish village.
Right. Yeah, it was kind of like an imaginary place, this Scotland for you, I imagine.
Yeah, exactly. But I did start hearing films in England, in spoken in English. I mean, I always remember the astonishing sight of Gary Cooper and Burt Lancaster in Veracruz speaking to each other in voices that became so distinctive in time that I wondered how I could ever have accepted them in Spanish.
Did it become impossible then to watch films that were dubbed because it was just like then it becomes too jarring?
It became a little more distancing and difficult, but also as the years were passing, so my sense of amusement increased at the fact that I had surrendered to these films for so long without question.
I mean, yeah, I guess it's like, trying to tell you what air smells like when you're breathing it. You're just, it's just
the way it is. And the most preposterous voices as well. I mean, I remember one night my father went with me to the village cinema. It was a night of thunder and lightning, and he was about the only person in the cinema. And we went to see the Lavender Hill Mob. And again, Alec Guinness and Stanley Holloway speaking in Spanish was just astonishing.
So your sort of school time, people nowadays will look at sort of a boarding school in Scotland and think immediately of Hogwarts, but this was 1960s, and it was, it was fair to say probably a mixed bag educationally. How do you feel about it now?
Well, it felt like jail,
right.
And it felt like as if my parents were a long, long way from jail. As in those days they were, because travel to the southwest of Spain, where they lived, involved several trains and one crucial plane ride, if not 2. And it was it was a congested business, travel. And so I felt completely isolated, which was really only softened by the fact that when I went to stay with my aunt on holidays, she wasn't terribly interested in me, and nor I in her. And I discovered all these cinemas that were a bus ride away from where she and my uncle lived. So I went on this binge. So by the end of my first holiday in Western Scotland, when I, my parents couldn't afford to take me out, to Spain all the time. So I stayed with them, and I saturated myself with films spoken in English. And by the end of that first holiday, I had pretty much forgotten that Tarzan's yodel used to be in Spanish.
Spanish yodel. That's so amazing. And your relief to some degree from this prison is not only given by your cinema going, it's also music. You become intensely, to say interested in music isn't enough. It's like you're passionate about music at this point.
Yeah. Well, my sister, who is 8 years older than me, was really my conduit to that, because she had one of those enormous portable radios. They were a piece of luggage essentially that she carried around with her, and she played it. And so through her, I heard British pop records of that moment. And they really started getting into my system, because in Spain, there was no chance to hear them. And I arrived in England, although well-versed in dubbed versions of English language films, completely ignorant of pop music, which I learned about very quickly through her enormous radio.
And you're coming. I mean, you say this in the book as well. This is a time when listening to pop music is, you're listening to the art form which is kind of peaking at that point. Is getting to a point of absolute splendor with the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, and all these amazing acts. So there's a brilliant confluence between your own interest and the state of the art.
Completely. And it was an extraordinary time. And every time I read an article that's retrospective, and the names come pouring off the page, I'm just astonished at the intensity, longevity, and gravity of so much of the talent.
Absolutely. And this extends to you after you've left school, you start working. I mean, you do this, you sort of invent blogging before the internet, really. So start writing about your passion and your interest, and then it turns into your job.
Yes. Well, you have to audition even for underground magazines, as they were then rather quaintly called. And I auditioned by doing a few reviews for them, which led them to feel confident that I might be able to do a bit more. And then I started doing a bit more. So it was a fabulous, painless entry into a parallel universe, really, of London and all the ebullience and pulse beat that it had at the time. And I was just by that stage, I wasn't the boy from the Spanish village anymore, but I was very shy about meeting people and revealing what a yokel I was, when they were so smooth and fluent.
And you were becoming, the list of names that you're encountering, and you become very greedy at this moment. You confess yourself for live performance. You go out every night and you're watching new bands and new groups and everything. That must have been a wonderful whirl of experience. I mean, that's an Antonioni film right there.
Well, it was extraordinary, because I never realized that this could be available to someone like me. And all I had to do was to get a job that made it available. And someone like me was suddenly there all the time. And I couldn't get enough. I mean, I was very, I think when you've been deprived for a few years, your first reaction to abundance is unremitting greed.
You glut yourself without.
Yeah. And I loved it. And it was also, I was by then a father of a baby boy. And so, it was a kind of antidote to the settling down, because when I was at these shows, I felt very unsettled, and then I go home and be settled.
You're the best of both worlds. What was was there a gig where you had that sort of pinch me moment of like, well, what's the young boy who rowing the boat across to the island to watch the B movies? What is he doing here?
Yeah, I wish there had been a moment that I can identify, because it would make the story much better if I could make one up. But to me, it was like a kind of unrolling carpet of options and possibilities, and there were so many different kinds of venues, small sweaty ones and big luxurious ones where visiting bands who were already famous would perform. I mean, I remember being at the very top deck of the Albert Hall, where the tickets were only about 2 and 6 or something like that in the old currency, watching a group whose first album I had just heard, a group called Family. And they were supporting a well-known American singer-songwriter called Tim Hardin. And I was up there practically on my own, because everyone there clearly could afford more expensive tickets. And I stood there looking down at Tim Hardin and then at Family, thinking, what am I doing here on the top level of the Albert Hall on my own?
That's, I mean, the groups, and so you start writing for Time Out.
Yes.
And you sort of move from Time Out to Rolling Stone, and then you move into sort of working another part of the business, which is sort of more becoming like a publicist. Correct me if I'm wrong here, because I don't want to.
Yes, that was exactly the trajectory. In the music business was very fluid, and in retrospect quite small. We all knew each other, or eventually got to meet each other at shows or at parties before or after shows, etc. And so, because we all knew each other, a potential employer such as Virgin already knew me and of me. And indeed, I had already written about Mike Oldfield's Tubular Bells, their first record that really built the company. And so when they decided to take on a full-time publicist with experience, I was by then a publicist with a bit of experience, having worked for Warner Electric Atlantic for a short amount of time. But it meant that I was in the pool swimming around and was invited to dive into another one.
Yeah, I mean, the description of some of the parties, I think you described John Peel's wedding, and there's Rod Stewart's there, and he's not quite become Rod Stewart. And then, I mean, I'm really resisting just asking you what's so-and-so like, because there are so many great names there.
Well, it was extraordinary, the fluency of the traffic. It seemed as if there were hardly any gatekeepers, it seemed. And of course, gatekeepers are synonymous with fame now, especially with celebrity music fame. And there weren't any. You just provided you could get into the event itself, you could circulate as you wanted. And if you went up to somebody who didn't want to talk to you, they'd just tell you so. And they'd usually have 2 or 3 other people around them, so it didn't matter. But it was an era of access above all.
Absolutely. I mean, I go to some parties at the film festivals that I attend, and there's always a party within the party. And usually, ironically, it's really lonely and sad, that party within the party. It's like, it's just some people in a corner.
Yeah, exclusivity comes at a price.
Exactly. One name I'm gonna have to ask you, and it might not be a name that but Ivor Cutler. I loved Ivor Cutler. I loved his poetry and I loved listening to him. And he was one of the acts that you were championing at Virgin Records. You describe him as being sort of in a genre of one.
Yeah, he was a dear man, Ivor Cutler. He wasn't quite as old as he looked at the time. He always looked, 3 times as old as everybody else who was on the bill with him, whereas he was only twice as old. And, he was just a delight, and he was so full of mischief and amusement, and of course, having been adopted by groups over the previous decade, he had this kind of uneasy personal traffic between what he did, which is write poetry and write stories, and also meet all these very kind of wild people that were not at all like him, but were fascinated by him, almost anthropologically. He really did make such a difference to Virgin. He was the perfect Virgin act in a way, because for as long as Ivor was making records for Virgin, which after 3 he didn't, Virgin could always, however successful it became, just declare that it was a place for everyone that was of interest to them.
Yeah. Anybody who's nurtured and given a home to a talent as strange and wonderful as Ivor Cutler, and if anybody listening to this is going, what are you talking about, Ivor Cutler? Why aren't you talking about Pink Floyd or the Sex Pistols or all these other people? Listen to some Ivor Cutler and you'll understand. So you in Virgin during the maelstrom of like the Sex Pistols, Mike Oldfield you've already mentioned, but a whole bunch of other acts which are coming in. Derek and Clive released their sort of spoken word albums with comedy which can only be described as not politically correct, let's say, but I mean. Yeah. We devoured this when I was at university 20 years ago. We devoured Derek and Clive as it was still shocking then, and I think to this day
they were very funny then. I mean, I suspect that had Peter and Dudley lived longer, they would have turned kind of bitter and twisted because it felt as if it was heading that way. But boy, they were funny. I mean, it was as if they were so reflexive with each other. They had known each other for so long. They had amused each other to a point and then probably stopped amusing each other for a while and then learning how to re-amuse each other. They were unavoidably funny. And when they made their records, it was outrageous. It was wilder in those corridors of the townhouse than it ever was with punk bands.
Right, yeah. When punk turns up, it's sort of like it's reinventing a wheel that's already been spun quite a few times.
Yes, yeah, with a different kind of cadence and emphasis, but same old thing, which is I'd like to get up your nose and upset you.
And I love the way you kind of transition through that you're sort of watching it happen, and you don't seem to sort of lose a step as you can go from Mike Oldfield, and John Anderson from Yes, and Phil Collins to Johnny Rotten and the Dead Kennedys.
Well, I didn't confuse myself with the groups.
Right.
I knew I wasn't the talent. If I had a talent at all, it was for understanding who they were, what I was dealing with, and how best to navigate through the maelstrom of media attention, which a number of them got and weren't really quite sure how to react to initially. So I think that's a very important, possibly the most important lesson I learned as a publicist, which is don't think you're the group. You're not. You help to steer them, and then you go home afterwards. and your home is probably, as it was in my case, semi-detached in West London, where my wife and 2 children were expecting me home at any moment, but any moment took a while.
Right, yeah, and obviously that has a personal cost as well.
Yeah.
What did your what was the biggest difference between a public perception of someone and your perception of them doing your job? Because you do have to sort of take the 3 o'clock in the morning phone call, or simmer down somebody who's maybe angry for something your act has done.
Yes, I just I tried to play a straight bat, as the expression used to go at the time, which was to listen, not to start shouting back, and to process and to decide as quickly as possible, sometimes during the call itself, what course of action was just and desirable, and make everyone calm down a bit. And because I was a bit older than everyone, and a bit older in those days was, 4 or 5 years, if that. But that was significant in your 20s. And so I tried to turn the gulf between how I was living and most of them were living, into an advantage, a benefit. That rather than seeing myself as some kind of uncool outsider, because my job was not to typecast myself that way, but to see myself as a living entity within their world.
Who did you have a lot of affection for?
Ivor Cutler.
Right. I knew it.
Yeah. I loved Robert Wyatt, who made 2 records for Virgin, wonderful records. I had known him before when he was in the group Shock Machine, and I continued to fraternize with him as a solo artist. And he remains to this day the only. Robert had an accident and ended up in a wheelchair, and then in that wheelchair, he had a hit single, which was a cover version of "I'm a Believer." And he appeared on Top of the Pops on his wheelchair, despite entreaties from the producers to put him in, a big wicker cane designer chair, and remains to this day the only person who has done that.
Explaining football to the friend who's just there for the nachos? Hard. Tailgating from home like a pro with snacks and drinks everyone will love? An easy win. And with Instacart helping deliver the snack time MVPs to your door, you're ready for the game in as fast as 30 minutes. So you never miss a play or lose your seat on the couch or have to go head-to-head for the last chicken wing. Shop Game Day Faves on Instacart and enjoy $0 delivery fees on your first 3 grocery orders. Offer valid for a limited time. Other fees and terms apply.
My dad works in B2B marketing. He came by my school for career day and said he was a big ROAS man. Then he told everyone how much he loved calculating his return on ad spend. My friends still laugh at me to this day.
Not everyone gets B2B, but with LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people who do. Get a $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/results to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be, to be.
So I loved him. The most entertaining group of all, really, with whom I traveled incessantly, was XTC.
Right, yeah, a great band.
Yeah, they lived in Swindon and were from there, and they were just magic. They had a kind of perfect tightrope walk of youthful excitement and also great wit, and in certain cases civility as well. And it was wonderful to go to small French and Dutch clubs with them when they were touring Europe with the then not yet popular Talking Heads, and seeing the 2 groups support each other. Literally, XTC would have the chairs and the tables near the stage when Talking Heads were playing, and Talking Heads would reciprocate later. And it's found one of the great benefits of touring, I think, is the amount of friendships that can be formed. And they can be, the earlier in a group's life they begin, the more enduring they're likely to be. As we know, life becomes a bit more complicated when one has some success and another doesn't.
Yeah, I've just read the Chris Frantz. Is it Chris Frantz, the drummer from Talking Heads? His book that he wrote with Tina Weymouth, his wife, and it seemed a fairly mean-spirited book, to tell you the truth. It seemed to be David Byrne is a difficult guy to deal with, even as it admits that he's probably on the spectrum, and he's not necessarily in control of some of those behavioral issues. But what have you read the book, or are you?
I haven't, no, but I know they fell out a lot during the 80s. When I saw them was I think 1978 or so, where they hadn't even done more songs about building and food yet, or any of the things that made them the successes they became. I think they made one album at that point, which was Talking Heads 77. With one in the wings, so they were at a very different stage in their evolution, and I think again it's a very good example of a group that whose kind of ideological rupture began to escalate at the same rate as their success.
Right, yeah. As soon as people start buying their records, they start.
Yeah.
Arguing. Well, and another side effect of all this touring is that you get to read a lot of books, and this brings us on to kind of why you're on this particular podcast, which is you start writing about film, and it's really interesting because of all the people I've interviewed, your sort of entry into writing about Raymond Chandler in Hollywood, it feels like a unique one. You just sort of decide, oh, nobody's written a book about this guy, and he spent all this time in Hollywood, and I'm in Los Angeles, so I might as well write a book about it.
It was kind of like that. I mean, these things percolate over a while, but you can only decide once that you're going to and follow through. I never decided until I did, but I did know about. I was my dream life was really all about California. I mean, I became fascinated by it, and I had never visited it at the time. And so when I did, and I found myself on my first night there swimming under the Hollywood sign, I could hardly believe my luck.
This is a fascinating look at sort of a golden age of Hollywood as well. And Chandler, albeit he had a brief career as a screenwriter, he sort of touches a load of, there's an Alfred Hitchcock film, there's a Billy Wilder film, there's the adaptations of his own novels, of course, and you try to talk to most of these people, and you write this successful book.
Yeah, well, there were varying degrees of success with reaching those people. They were dying at quite a rate by that point, and many who were still alive had retired and were difficult to track down, or unwilling to speak because they really had enough of all that and possibly couldn't remember anymore. So I confined myself to just working my way through a list of people I knew were alive and that conceivably I could find. And it was great fun. I mean, it became a detective work in itself. And when you're writing a book about the writer of detective fiction, in Hollywood especially, you're kind of enslaved to the whole idea mysteries.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, there's a point in your memoir in which you actually sort of talk about, this is the real Chandler Los Angeles, the stucco and the sort of crumblingness of it.
Yeah, I stayed in a hotel that reminded me of that. And I drove a car that reminded me of that. I just wanted to immerse myself in what I imagined was that world in order to come out of it with a distinctive book about what's left of it, especially in the film world, which, as you noted, he contributed a bit to, and which did very well out of his novels.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it stretches further than even sort of direct adaptations. It's just the atmosphere of Chandler is in lots of noirs that he maybe don't have any formal connection.
Yeah, he was I mean, he wasn't in a field of one, but he tilled his own field very carefully, on the side, so that one can, well, if you've read enough detective fiction, you don't confuse him with Dashiell Hammett or slightly younger ones like Mickey Spillane and so on. It's a different way of seeing the world, and I think he also saw himself as a man of letters. So. But he would probably take objection to anyone thinking he would be slumming it by doing detective fiction, because he didn't see it that way at all.
Absolutely. I mean, I love Dashiell Hammett as well. I love all those hard-boiled writers, Jim Thompson, who, again, also has a brief sort of Hollywood interlude, if you like. And from there, you move towards actually becoming much more involved in the film industry, still to some degree in connection with Virgin. How does that start?
When I left Virgin briefly, I had a kind of 2 months falling out with them, and then I kind of missed them, and they missed me, thankfully. And so I had a conversation with Richard Branson about what I could enjoy doing there that would be useful to the company. And so we talked about, creative activities generally, books, films, television. It's the things that would amplify the brief of an entertainment company. One that wasn't confining itself to records and the musicians who go with them. So it's not often in anyone's life that you get an opportunity to kind of invent the job that you think you would do usefully, but that's as close as one could ever get, and there I was. So I invited people I knew in the film business to send us scripts and discuss ideas with us and so on and so forth, with a view eventually to making films. Because it, as people have told you to the point of tedium, it really takes forever, or can take forever. And so you just have to make sure that the architecture is sound and the intentions are clear. And very early on, a producer came to see me about money that was still short on a short film, a narrative film based on Graham Greene's story, A Shocking Accident. And there wasn't a lot of gap, but there was, for us, a new entity within the company. And I thought it was a wonderful idea and script, And when we managed to see that, Rupert Everett, who was then a young star, and Jenny Seagrove, who was just coming off the film Local Hero, and so she was one too, they both wanted to be in it. And so I thought, what a great way to dip our toes in the ocean. And so we did. And it won an Oscar. So what better departure point could you have?
Beginner's luck.
The invention of a new company.
There's a wonderful description of you going to the Oscars. I think it might be the ceremony just prior to you winning the Oscar. And you talk about how it's a television transmission. So when it cuts to break, everybody, it just stops. The whole thing just stops.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Someone comes on and starts cleaning the stage.
It was certainly then very much about the broadcast.
Right.
I think the show itself didn't really matter very much. Now, well, I don't know what they do to keep people entertained apart from have, scandalous stage attacks and stuff like that.
The slaps. I think they should make that a part of every ceremony. Someone should slap someone.
Yeah. Who's going to be the hitter and who is going to be the hit?
Yeah, exactly. It could be a section. Enough in memoriam. We can cut that down and we could just have slaps instead. So you go from this short film, which is, as you say, sort of dipping your toe into the pool, to having having a huge influence on the British film industry. And this is sort of when the British film industry itself is... you make the point in your in your book that the average domestic sort of British film goer is going to the cinema once every 15 months. I was shocked by that it's such a small... at this time in the 1980s in Italy, admittedly, you had less TV in Italy, but in Italy, people were going to the cinema 2 or 3 times a week.
Well, video had become very important in the UK around this time. And people felt that if they could watch something at home, then they would and could. So cinema, I think, lost some of its allure. People would still come out for the big event film, but if it could be got on rather bad VHS a few months later, then they waited. But the film business, like most areas of the entertainment world, is cyclical and capricious. It just sways from abundance to poverty, and these habits just get into the bloodstream, and you kind of have to defy the bad times and mind the costs. And put, and try and find extra money for the good times to elevate the nature of the entertainment.
And so you start with films like Electric Dreams is a film that I remember being on the cinema when I was growing up. I was in the 1980s. I was coming of age, so to speak. And then films like 1984, which stars possibly my favorite actor of all time, Richard Burton. But I was surprised reading that about how late on in the process Burton came on board. He was
we'd forgotten about him. Paul Schofield was going to play the role for a while, and then broke his leg.
And Sean Connery, you mentioned as well.
Sean Connery was good. Yeah, so Mike Radford, the director, went down to Marbella to disturb Connery during one of his games of golf down there. He would have been very good, of course. Others, we tried to get Rod Steiger. Anyway, the path eventually led to Richard Burton. And so all of us said almost in unison, why didn't we think of him first?
Well, I mean, it seems like a perfect casting. It's absolutely, I can't. All of those names are great, but I can't imagine any of them being as good as.
Well, the nature of the role and the nature of the scene, the major scene between O'Brien and between Hurt and Burton, is that you have to be spellbound by his voice. He has a lot to say, and he is not going to be hurried because he's a torturer, and torturers cannot be hurried. So you must seek out a presence that is reinforced by a voice that is just beyond dispute, where that it's a voice that could persuade you to do something that would hurt you, that would be against your instincts and desires and so on. So we got the right voice and the right presence.
And there's a brilliant quote from Michael Radford that you mentioned of him having difficulty remembering his lines, and he's like, the problem is he's got all the Shakespeare plays in there. He hasn't got room for our stuff.
He can't remember my script. Yeah, that was funny. Yeah.
There's I don't know if conflict of interest is the right word, because sometimes it's very symbiotic, but there is a relationship between the music arm of Virgin and the film arm, in which, so for instance, for 1984, you've got Annie Lennox and Eurythmics doing the Sex Crimes song, which I remember being a big hit at the time. And then sometimes it feels more symbiotic in the sense of like Absolute Beginners, where you've got a real musical and a wonderful David Bowie song, one of his better songs of the 80s.
Yeah. What all the films have in common is that they have really ambitious soundtrack albums and ideas behind the making of those albums. We started out very traditionally on a film called Secret Places, where we Zelda Barron, the writer-director, wanted to work with Michel Legrand, with whom she had just done the film Yentl when she was doing continuity for Barbara Streisand. And he agreed to do it. And he was exceptional. I mean, a great start for a record company to feel that they were in the hands of a master. And whilst we knew that a Michel Legrand soundtrack album was not going to sell like a pop record that revived the late 1950s and included David Bowie among them, we did feel that each soundtrack must have its own character and its own identity. And so with that in mind, we set about it. The soundtrack of 1984, again, we wanted to be able to score the film in the right kind of way, but also to have something to release that would help to reinforce financial safety net if the film didn't work commercially. And so I think from that point onwards, we were very conscious of that. On a film we did called Captive, The Edge from U2 came on and worked on it. And we were always attentive to that element of it. And with Absolute Beginners, of course, which went considerably over budget, the soundtrack actually saved us because David Bowie's title song was such an enormous hit that, and we had the soundtrack. So it was a very important decision that was made at that moment.
I'm looking through these films that you produced and brought to the screen. It makes me sort of it's amazing how in the 80s the British films were so varied. I mean, you had Absolute Beginners, 1984. You have also Merchant Ivory working at this point. You have Alan Parker going to the States. So you almost do a film with at one point. I think was he I'm not sure if he was in the running for Gothic, because you had several.
No, he wasn't. The only director that I seriously considered before Ken Russell was an American director, Bob Rafelson.
Oh, of course, yeah. Well, that would have
He
been
would
a
have been,
different
he would
film.
have been very interesting, but yeah, a very different. I think he would have found a chilly autumn in the Lake District something he could happily avoid.
Ken Russell, though, I mean, he's yeah, I think you put it that he turns up in a press conference in Cannes, his white hair and his red socks, and he's sort of and he's just like, oh, this guy's a walking photo op. He's
He was, well, Ken was so practiced at stuff like that because by the time he did Gothic, he had been famous for at least 20 years and famous for both what he did and his reputation as a so-called wild man. And mostly he was actually a very kind of gentle soul, but he wasn't intimidated by the prospect of an argument. I don't think he sought them, but I think he was happy enough about having them.
Yeah, he wasn't someone who was conflict averse, so to speak.
Yes. Well put.
I should have got a job doing
yeah, that's.
I'm really aware that there's a volume 2 of your memoir that I am yet to read, and I'm really aware that what I would love to do. And some of your finest achievements are sort of coming up. You've got, Priscilla, Queen of the Desert, which is a huge hit later on. But rather than sort of rush everything and squeeze everything in, I'd love to do a sort of volume 2 of this chat as well, so that we can sort of expand on this, if that's okay with you at some point.
That's fine, because the Australian life, which is 34 years of it now, has a different rhythm to it. It's obviously different people working on the films, a kind of diminishing interest in the music scene on my part, and yet still buoyant because films need music. And so there's a part of me where the kind of record company man never completely disappears. So that'll be interesting, really, to make that comparison between the early years and the later years, because it's the same person living them in a different country. He's doing approximately the same things that he did before, but by doing them somewhere else, he's in a kind of parallel universe.
Was there ever a sense that to some degree, going back to Australia, I mean, it feels like that every chapter of your life has a sort of very geographical character. So you have your childhood in Spain, you have your education in Scotland, you have your first part of your career in London. Is that something that makes any sense to, or were you flying around so much that it doesn't really matter?
Oh yeah, I think one of the things that may strike you about Volume 2, Time Flies 2, is that I spend so much time traveling, and I hadn't realized, despite the fact that I flew many thousands of miles to get here and had been here 3 or 4 times by the time I settled here, that I just didn't realize I'd be traveling so much. Where I'd go to Paris with the rough cut of a film that we hope to get into Cannes and do the whole return trip, including 2 screenings in Paris, in 4 days.
Right.
I mean, it's
crazy.
It's delirious stuff, and I rather enjoyed it at the time. And lots of life or death moments, like finding myself on a Singapore airliner an hour out of Sydney, where the oxygen masks all come down, all 250 of them at the same time, and there's Mayday shouting and stuff like that going on, and just. I think that people, it may be easier now, although I doubt it, but I think that to live in Australia and have international dealings in a pre-digital world was immensely wearying on the system. Right. And yet it also simultaneously adrenalized it. It was, oh, you mean I have to go to Los Angeles this weekend and be back on Monday? Of course I'll do that. Travel became, however squalid it was when the budget was low, there were enough little kind of luxurious dimensions to it that made it seem like a desirable, glamorous activity. And we killed ourselves during those years. And now, of course, everybody's Zooming.
Well, for the second part of the conversation, I can always come to Australia if the budget is.
So anyway, whenever you like.
Yeah, that would be brilliant, because I really don't want to rush it. And I even feel like I've rushed volume 1 just in this hour because there's so much to talk about. I mean, people will read the autobiography. If they hear this podcast and they go out and they read the autobiography, which I assure people they should do, they'll be like, John, why the hell didn't you ask about all of this other stuff? One thing I just to lead on from the last thing you said, there's a brilliant episode where in your story where your wife gives birth to your first child, and you think, oh, I can go and see a film in London and then be back in time. So you basically leave the hospital, go and see a movie, and then come back.
I know, it's a kind of startling irregularity. It was as if I had somehow subconsciously treated film as a reward for real or perceived hardship. You know, I've worked hard enough, even though I didn't actually have the child. It's been really trying. So what I'm going to do to celebrate is take a train down to London and watch, Antonioni's Zabriskie Point. Yeah, it's a kind of sickness. That's beyond dispute. But I like to think that I've kind of balanced it out a little better nowadays. That was probably the peak of my idiocy.
It's a sickness I share. I remember leaving my wife Lydia in hospital with our second child, just born, and going to see Kill Bill 2 as my celebration. And I was just like, why?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Thankfully, we're aware of it, and so we probably don't need that much help at the moment.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thank you so much for talking to me, Al. I really appreciate it, and I'm really looking forward to reading the next book and having part 2 of this conversation.
Pleasure. See you then.
Ragazzi, mi si smonta tutto. Il film non si fa più. 2 giorni qua non ci deve essere più niente. Bisogna cominciare subito. Coraggio, al lavoro. Buttate giù. Dico bene, dottore?
Sì, grazie. Arrivederci, ragazzi. Ci vediamo in un prossimo film.
Lo speriamo.
Ciao, marinai.
Coming soon, Cinema Italia, a new podcast dedicated to the glories of Italian cinema. Each week, special guests from around the world will discuss their favourite Italian films, from spaghetti westerns to neo-realism, gialli to Roberto Benigni, La Dolce Vita to Cannibal Holocaust. We'll be casting a new light on old classics, as well as exploring recent currents in contemporary Italian film. Along the way, we'll unearth some lesser-known gems. Subscribe now so as not to miss an episode. Presented by me, John Bleasdale.
Arrivederci, ragazzi. Ci vediamo in un prossimo film.
Lo speriamo.
Selling a little or a lot? Shopify helps you do your thing however you cha-ching. Shopify is the global commerce platform that helps you sell at every stage of your business. From the launch your online shop stage to the first real-life store stage, all the way to the did we just hit a million orders stage. Shopify is there to help you grow. Shopify helps you turn browsers into buyers with the internet's best converting checkout. 36% better on average compared to other leading commerce platforms. Because businesses that grow, grow with Shopify. Get a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/work. Shopify.com/work.
Hey, it's Mark Maron from WTF here to let you know that this podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. And I'm sure the reason you're listening to this podcast right now is because you chose it. Well, choose Progressive's Name Your Price tool, and you could find insurance options that fit your budget, so you can pick the best one for your situation. Who doesn't like choice? Try it at Progressive.com. And now, some legal info. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law. Not available in all states.
My dad works in B2B marketing. He came by my school for career day and said he was a big ROAS man. Then he told everyone how much he loved calculating his return on ad spend. My friends still laugh at me to this day.
Not everyone gets B2B, but with LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people who do. Get a $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/results to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be, to be.